thank you for coming to Glenmore. It's an honor to have everyone here today to be able to celebrate the life of a very amazing man, Robert Smokey Vrilakas. Glenmore has opened their doors to all of you to come in and celebrate his story and to support Clackamas Community College's Military Family Scholarship Endowment. I believe everyone knows that the proceeds from the book sales today will support veterans and military families for years to come. So we thank Bob for this collaboration and partnership, and we really thank Glenmore. They have just been absolutely amazing. I'd like to say a special thank you to a few folks. Our board, Vice Chair Jean Bidstrup. Jean, where are you? Or could you stand up? Thank you for joining us today. And you'll get to meet some of the other dignitaries along the way, but I would like to say a special thank you to our foundation staff, Greg Fitzgerald and Vicki Smith, who are out here selling books and supporting you today. If you have any questions, just see them at the end of the program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ambassador Dan Hitchcock.
I want to thank all the guests that are here today, and also want to say that it's a privilege for me to be a participant in today's book signing, rather a unique event. I want to thank Shelley for all her hard work and coordination in putting this together, and I know we put a lot of time and effort in it, and thank you very much. I want to thank Bob for his support and willingness to support the Clackamas Community College Military Family and Scholarship Foundation. Also would like to thank your family for being here today and their support and help as we have this nice event. At this time, I'd like to introduce the University of Portland Honor Guard, and they will do a flag presentation for us. Members of that Honor Guard are Noah Harvey, Nina Sackett, Romelia de Guzman, Justin Klein, and Alexander Perini.
Set. Arms.
If you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order. Arms. March on, march. Right turn, march. Forward, march.
At this time, I would like to introduce Shamia Fagan, a representative from the state of Oregon. And I'd like you to know that she's probably one of the few representatives that has ridden her Harley with the Patriot Riders.
If I'd known he was going to tell you that, I might have worn my rhinestone-studded Harley jacket. but instead I came in a suit. Welcome and thank you so much for letting me be a part of this incredible book signing today. I've got to tell you that this facility was one that I watched go up brick by brick. My son attends daycare across the lot at the Valley View Church. And I will say that the construction you had going on here caused me to add about 15 minutes in my drop-off and 15 minutes when I picked him up, but not for the obvious reasons you would expect with construction delays, but rather because my 2-year-old son was absolutely fascinated with the giant tractors and dump trucks and dirt. So I simply could not leave the Valley View parking lot, either coming or going, without spending about 15 minutes talking about the arm and the bucket and what excavators do. So I was actually a little bit sad to see the project actually finished, because it was so fun with my 2-year-old to have him learn about every single part of an excavator, because we spent many minutes studying them every day. So what an honor to be in this facility for the first time for this occasion today, to honor Bob Smokey Vrilakas for his extraordinary life and the profound service that he's done to our country. Despite my obvious youth, I grew up with a really profound appreciation for the greatest generation. And that's because my grandmother, Imogene Fagan, was a Wanda the welder on the Portland shipyards during the World War II. And I grew up hearing stories from her and the stories that she told my parents and aunts and uncles about what it was like to truly serve our country in a way that I think my generation, or at least many of my generation, don't quite understand. And when my grandmother was welding, at one point, she welded ship 939 perfectly. And so they named it after her. And so I grew up my whole life with this picture, which you can't see, but I'll describe, is my grandma sitting in her overalls with a kerchief on her head, sitting aboard ship 939, the USS Imogene Fagan. So that photo was always displayed in our home. And so I was always able to have this deep sense of gratitude for the greatest generation and the sacrifices that were made for me and for the generations that come. And that's why I'm particularly honored to be here today to celebrate the life and the extraordinary service of Bob Smokey Vrilakas, because I don't know that every kid of my generation had someone like my grandma to continue to instill in us what it means to serve our country. And that's why the act of actually taking the time and the tedious project, I'm sure at times, that writing a book is, but also the painful process to relive some of those memories that I'm sure are easier left buried, so that my generation and those that come before have this incredible record of what it really means to serve our country. I think that at times my generation falls into the what I want, what's about me, 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 and it's people like Bob and my grandma and many of you that show us that ultimately it's always about the us and the we. And so I am grateful to be a part of this ceremony today, so that not only me, but that my son and the generations before us have this incredible record, so that we always remember that no matter the dreams that I have for me, that life is not about me, that it's about us, and that when your country calls and when your community calls and when you live in such extraordinary times as Bob did, that the country calls in a very significant way to tell us the true way to answer that call. So please join me in a grateful round of applause for Bob Smokey Vrilakas.
Almost lost him. Thank you, Representative Fagan. Really appreciate it, and very motivational. I also like to recognize other veterans that we might have with us here today. I understand that we have a few people from World War II. Could you stand? Okay. about the Korean War? We have veterans from the Korean War here? Oh, okay. And Vietnam? Kosovo was not necessarily a war, but do we have anyone here that went over there on peacekeeping missions? Anyone that went to Iraq? Anyone that went to Afghanistan? And anyone that served during any of these periods in the Guard or Reserve or War or uniform that we missed here. I'd like to thank the Portland State Color Guard. They did a great job for us, and it's really nice to have the cadets here as part of our program and presentation. I was fortunate to receive a copy of Look, Mom, I Can Fly about Christmas time. And as I opened the book and started to read through the book, I saw that we had a little in common. Not a lot, but a little. And that was that I lived in northern California, less than 100 miles from where Bob lived. Also, in reading through the book, I found out that he took infantry training at Camp Roberts, California, which is a beautiful spot in California. And I also had some infantry training at Camp Roberts. That's about the only thing we really had in common, Bob, but it certainly hooked me into the book so that I wanted to read it through, and I had a hard time putting it down, and I'm sure those of you who haven't had a chance to read it will too. I recently had a lunch with a friend of mine that I had worked with for a lot of years, and he was a B-17 pilot during World War II at the same time Bob was there. He flew 34 missions, and he told me that it was because of Bob and people like Bob that flew the P-38s and the other fighter planes that protected the B-17s and B-24s that allowed them safety and able to come home. And wanted me to say thanks to you, Bob. Bob is one of the few people that I have ever met that was not only in World War II, served in Korea, and served in Vietnam. And Bob, I salute you. And now I give you, Robert, to tell you a little bit about his book and give you some information that I'm sure will pique your interest and cause you to want to buy 2 or 3 more books for your friends.
Thank you, sir, for your very kind words. They're much appreciated. And thank you all for being here today at this gathering. Thank you. I'm very honored by your presence here and very flattered by your interest in my book. I think you'll like it. And I hope that I get to meet each of you before the day is over. I'm going to talk not so much about the book, but I'm going to talk to you briefly about my background and how the book came about. Then we will get down to the business at hand, which is signing the book. I date back quite a long way. With tongue in cheek, I can say I experienced World War I. Now let me save you the math. Put me down as just plain the same as age is dirt. That age is okay as long as you're still breathing. Having grown up during the Great Depression, my earliest aspirations were not very high. At that time, getting a job, any job, that was adequate enough to keep one fed, and maybe the owner of a Model A Ford, was our primary goal in life. In the early 20s, when horse and buggies outnumbered cars in my area, an occasional Ford tri-motor passenger plane flying over would bring out the entire population of my small town. An awesome sight then, much as we view a spaceship flying over today. Neither flying a plane or writing a book ever entered my wildest dreams during those days. The threat of World War II in early 1940s made big changes in most young people's lives. And at age 22, I found myself drafted into the U.S. Army 6 months prior to the Pearl Harbor 1941 attack. My book describes the training as an infantryman at Camp Roberts, as was mentioned. We had company there. Then as a fighter pilot, and then my combat experience. The book was developed from memoirs that I had written not long after retirement from the U.S. Air Force in 1973. The memoirs were intended to inform our offspring and grandkids. But the word got out, and those that read the memoirs, kept coming back and begging me to put it in book form. The book, entitled Book Mom, I Can Fly, was published in 2011 and happily has been very well accepted. It has received a great number of 5-star ratings, and several couldn't put me downs, which I'm very proud of and very happy to have completed. That alone, as you know, it is serving a great purpose today in support of the Clackamas Community College Veterans Scholarship Program. That alone has made the effort well worthwhile. Finally, I'm a 4-month resident of this Glenmore facility, and it has met my most hopeful explanations. It's a great place to live. Somebody described it as a cruise, and it is. It's, excuse me, I'm at the end of a cold, I'm sorry. Because of our age group, oh, well, I hope you'll get acquainted with this facility. It really is great. And the management is outstanding. Because of our age group, there are veterans here, as previously mentioned, from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and excuse me, even Iraq. Again, it will be my pleasure to meet each of you today, hopefully over a signed book. I have to apologize for my cough. I'm way over a cold and was talking fairly normally yesterday, but the cold came back and left a calling card. And so if I croaked at you, it's not me, it was a frog. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's a real pleasure that I have an opportunity to introduce one of my good friends, probably one of my closest friends, who was a Vietnam veteran, had 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 tour as an infantry officer on the ground, a 2nd tour as a helicopter pilot, and I would like to introduce Major General Kurt Loop.
Well, good afternoon. I'm your entertainment for the afternoon, I guess. When I finished the book, it's a very, very well-written book. It takes you right into the cockpit, right into his life, right into his training, right into his tent in North Africa, which, by the way, he burned down. But it brings you through his career. And as I look back in aviators, there's certain times that are very special to you. And so I picked 3 of them. And I'm going to read from those. The first is his first flight, solo flight in a P-38. Now this is the ship you're going to take into combat with you, so you better know it pretty well. The day I was to fly the P-38 for the first time arrived in mid-April 1943. It was a springtime at Muroc Army Air Base in Southern California, Mojave Desert, the kind of day that the Mojave Desert dwellers love to talk about. It was cloudless at the very comfortable temperature, and visibility was so crystal clear that the distant mountains surrounding the desert appeared to be just a few miles away. The day was in sharp contrast to midsummer, when flying was often had to be done in the morning. The afternoon desert sun on the metal airplane made it too hot to touch, let alone climb in the cockpit. Having completed both basic Army infantry and Air Corps training, I was at my life's best physical condition. There were, however, accompanied internal doubts that brought goosebumps, such as, are you really ready for this? And are you sure you were meant to do this? This was a difficult kind of introduction to an airplane. The single-seated cockpit and only one set of flight controls did not permit hands-on learning from a flight instructor. All that must be learned had to be learned in the classroom by oral instruction on the ground and from the aircraft flight manual. Further, the condition of the P-38s we were to fly were not the best. They were older models with high flying time on them. Mechanical failures had become somewhat commonplace. The men who maintain them are in the learning process, just as we pilots. There had been an abnormal number of engine failures in flight, which the novice P-38 pilot presented to him was a daunting challenge. Too often, a novice experienced an engine failure on takeoff would end up in the crash landing off the runway. The emergency procedures had to be right in such a case, or the consequences could be serious. Loss of an engine in flight also required precise procedures by the pilot to shut down the dead engine, maintain control of the aircraft, and bring it to a safe landing. This was demonstrated quite vividly during our training when two P-38 pilots crashed almost simultaneously due to engine failures, one burning on each end of the runway. Some crashes resulted in pilot fatalities. Others forced or persuaded the trainee to leave the program. You can't dwell on these kinds of negatives and fly, so I put all that out of my mind and surveyed the P-38s, all in a row on the flight line. They looked beautiful, parked with their nose of the plane slightly elevated, as if they couldn't wait to get into the air. My instructor had accompanied me to my assigned P-38 and crawled up on the wing as I buckled in. Taxi instructions from the tower sounded somewhat paternal to a newbie, cleared me to takeoff position near the end of the runway. My instructor then rode on my wing as I taxied out. He suggested that I take it up to about 6,000 feet, get the feel of the plane, and then practice shutting down an engine to include feathering the propeller of the dead engine. Feathering a dead engine propeller by turning the blades horizontal to the airstream is essential to stop engine rotation and reduces the drag on the aircraft. While taxiing, to maintain hydraulic pressure and keep the brakes available, it's necessary for the pilot to continually pump the rudder pedals. By the time the takeoff location was reached at the end of the runway, my legs felt like lead weights. The twin rudders of their P-38 would flutter as they reached the end of the runway for takeoff. The flutter was caused by the pilot's legs shaking with fatigue as they pumped the rudder pedals. I'm sure my rudders were doing a dance. At the end of the runway, my instructor made sure all the latches were secure, gave me a reassuring thumbs up, and slid off the wing. I was now on my own. It was reminiscent of my first solo flight almost a year prior in a bi-wing fabric-covered PT-17, except that now my head was crammed with thousands of more thoughts about systems operations, emergency procedures, flap, throttle, tachometer, airspeed, and control settings, plus an endless advice on what to do and what not to do. On top of that, the task of trying to guide and control the newest warplane in the military, something that could reach speeds I and all the other pilots had never experienced. Following pre-flight, engine run-up and final checklist, I requested clearance from the tower to proceed to the end of the runway. A matter-of-fact and professional voice of the tower cleared me to taxi onto the runway and take off. In takeoff, the final blow to my legs came as I pumped the brakes to hold the airplane and applied full power. The engines revved to the full power and stabilized. When it seems the legs couldn't take another second of this kind of punishment, I released the brakes, and the P-38 shot forward like a drag racer. It continued to accelerate rapidly to liftoff speed, about 90 miles an hour, and responded like a well-trained racehorse to my commands as it became airborne. I was so busy getting my gear up, my flaps up, stabilizing power, checking engine instruments, my airspeed, that I was at 4,000 feet doing about 260 miles an hour before realizing it. It had taken to the sky like a homesick angel. Confidence in my ability to fly the P-38 began to take charge. It flew beautifully as I put it through a series of air maneuvers to learn how it would respond. He has now mastered the aircraft that he's going to take into combat. One of the other, probably even more exciting times is, for every aviator, is your first solo flight. It's the first time that you, the machine that is going to defy gravity and take you into the air, without an instructor pilot, without another pilot to save you occurs. At that time, you're very, very exciting. So let me continue with his first solo flight. After about 8 hours of instruction in the air and countless hours of ground school, the instructor took his 5 students to the auxiliary grass-covered field near Ontario. He had me shoot a couple landings, then taxied over to the parking area, while he climbed out and said, "Okay, you're on your own. Shoot a couple landings and then come back in and park it." It was a big moment. Every pilot can remember every detail vividly and describe his feelings about his first solo flight. Flying with an instructor who was always there to take over the controls and save you in a landing or an air maneuver was one thing. To have such reassuring crutch suddenly removed was like being thrown into the middle of an ocean full of sharks. It felt absolutely devastating at the time. I conjured up what I hoped was a confident look and taxied away between feelings of high exultation and deep misgivings. All at the time trying to remember and do everything just as the instructor had taught me. A light from the control tower provided traffic control since the PT-17 had no radio. After checking magnetos and controls at the end of the dirt runway, I looked at the tower and noted the green light, clearing me for takeoff. The moment of truth had arrived, and with much of the same feeling as diving off a 150-foot tower into a small tank of water, I released the brakes and started advancing the throttle. Takeoff proceeded uneventfully, and I found myself all alone in the air and wondering if this is all going to be true. Everything went around the pattern very well, and as I lined up and throttled back for approach to the runway, the reassuring green light cleared me to land, flashed from the tower. I relived my entire life during that trip around the field. A fence at the end of the field made it necessary to clear that, but still get down within the confines of the air patch. Everything was going quite smoothly as I set up a glide path and maintained final approach speed. Landings, of course, were the most difficult part of flying the PT-17, particularly in a crosswind. The landing required leveling off just above stall speed, with the wheels just off the ground and the air point in a 3-point landing position. Front wheels and tail skids should touch the ground just at the point of stall. For reasons I still can't explain, I left most of that final part out of the procedure, and I hit the ground pretty much in my glide attitude. The result was that I ricocheted back into the air to an altitude of about 50 feet. And to make matters worse, the plane went into a vertical left bank. I looked down at the left wing and I saw it was narrowly missing the ground. When you have been trained enough in a particular emergency, certain procedures seem to shout at you when needed. The instructors often repeated words to hit the throttle and go around when in trouble on landing made it almost an automatic reaction. So with full power, I managed to level the wings just as the aircraft skimmed back along the ground, climbed slowly and safely out of trouble, and headed around the pattern again, much embarrassed by my performance. My concern at this point was, what was the instructor thinking? Would he wash me out? Was flying, which I had learned to love, no longer going to be available to me? This landing, this next one, better be a good one. And so it goes with most people on their first solo flight. Not always perfect, but certainly exhilarating. The third and final reading comes from any combat pilot when you're getting near the end of your tour. Either your time is up, you've come to the number of required flights, and you're getting short. Now's the time you don't want anything to happen. So the final reading I want to take from is Bob's 48th mission. Mission number 48, which is not dated in my record book, was to dive bomb the target at Anzio beachhead, which had just been established. The fighting was particularly bitter there for the ground forces because the Germans held the high ground and appeared to have the most favorable defensive position of that location. Our squadron was assigned the mission, and we were only able to muster 8 aircraft. I was leading red flight, and Lieutenant Keenholz was leading white flight. It was a beautiful, clear day, and we were to fly to the bomb line, where the Allied forces met the German forces across Italy, then proceed out off the west coast and up to the Anzio beachhead. I stayed at about 2,000 feet on the way to the bomb line, enjoying the scenery and noting the destruction caused by the fighting as we had progressed north. We were coming up to the bomb line and about to turn west when all of a sudden the whole sky erupted with very accurate flak. Apparently the bomb line was not where we had been briefed, and we were right over the top of the German ground forces at a pretty low altitude. The shell bursts were so close we could hear them, and the barrage literally blew our flight apart. We wheeled around and up like a flock of shot-at geese. Keenholz called to say he had been hit, his controls were locked, and he was going into a spin. He was very close to bailing out, but by the time we got around to where we could spot him, he had regained control. It may have been the concussion from the exploding shell that caused his problem. I checked out the rest of both flights and found that no one could determine if they had any damage to their respective aircraft, so we continued on with the mission, checking each other's aircraft for visual damage en route. I'm going to stop there and let you get the book and find out what happened on the rest of that 3-hour mission. You'll find it an exciting book, a very accurate book. And Bob, thank you for a copy. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, General Loop. You have talent that I was unaware of. Great job. Next, we have 2 gentlemen here from the Endowment Fund, Lowell Miles and Jerry Turner, who I think I understand are 2 of the founders of the fund. And they'll give us an update on what is happening and what you plan for the next happening. Jerry and Lowell.
Thank you, and I'm proud to be here today and at your book signing. It's a great privilege. Yes, Jerry and I were part of the first group to start the endowment for the military families, although I have to say the brains behind the whole idea, I think, was Shelley Perini. And she got a bunch of us together and talked to us, and Jerry and I and a number of others started this endowment with about $50,000 each to get it started. Our goal is to reach $1 million. We still have a ways to go on that, but we're hoping that we're going to put a little more emphasis into it now and reach that $1 million. We know that our veterans and military personnel have a very rough time, but they also have the privilege of getting education and so forth, but the families have been left out. And even though our veterans and our military people serve with great sacrifice, so does the families. So we are interested in helping those family members, whether it's the children or the wives, to be able to take advantage of this endowment to get some education at Clackamas Community College and even other colleges to further their education and be able to partake of something that they wouldn't be able to otherwise. So with that, I'd like to say that if any of you have an inclination to help us out or know of somebody that has a great interest in the military and our veterans, we would very much appreciate you giving us a good word. And with that, thank you very much.
I'm Jerry Turner, and I was in the Navy from late 60s through the early 70s. And I'm very envious of Smokey here, who I'm really looking forward to meeting a little later, but I'm very envious because I'm afraid of heights, so I couldn't have got in the plane and done what he did. I'm going to give you a little short story of why I got behind the endowment in the beginning. My wife and I was invited to go to Palm Springs back about 1995 or so, and her boss had retired as a dentist, and he moved, actually an oral surgeon, and he moved to Palm Springs. And so he encouraged us to come down and spend a few days with him, and so we went down and really had a great time. And there was a show that they were doing in Palm Springs, and it was a bunch of old, I was told old, vaudeville players that actually were putting this show on. Most of them were retired, and they were doing a skit about the military from the Spanish-American War on up to current times at that time, and it was really great. You know, the show was phenomenal, and I just was amazed. Some of the people in the staff and on the show were in their 80s, and the youngest ones were in their 60s. So it was pretty amazing. They could twist and twirl and jump and do all the things they could do. And I'm starting to find out that it's a lot more amazing than I thought it was back then. But anyway, excuse me. Anyway, at the end of it, they had all the military people that had served in the military stand up and excuse me, and they honored us for our service. And just like I almost did there, I started bawling like a baby, and my wife looked at me, and she thought something was wrong, and she's, "What's wrong?" And I said, "That's the first time anybody had thanked me for my service." So when I came back got out of the military, I came back, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Went to Clackamas Community College on the GI Bill, and then went on to Portland State and got my degrees and started a business, and that's been very successful. I've been very fortunate. But I feel so strongly about this that a little later this year, I'm going to make another small contribution, maybe 6 figures, to the endowment. And one of the things that we've done is we've modified it a little bit so that veterans can actually participate as well. So it isn't just families anymore. We don't have the great full GI Bill like we used to have. Doesn't cover all the things, and so there's veterans that have a need, and so the endowment is really working towards, the whole family. And to Lowell's point, the children of the veterans, they're off serving their country, and they're not able to maybe put aside the money that some of the people that are more fortunate can, that work every day, and therefore, the endowment is there to help wherever we can. So thank you.
Okay, it's time for books. Come in. There's also some beautiful dessert and fruit here from Glenmore. They've just been so incredibly generous. Enjoy and mingle and buy some books and get them signed. Say hello to Bob.